This podcast episode is for investor education purposes only and is not intended to provide and should not be relied on for investment advice. Consult your personal investment advisor before engaging in any securities transaction.
We've reached the midpoint of 2025 and the dog days of summer. So it's time for a mid-year check-in on your financial goals. And did you hear? There's a new big tax bill that just passed. What does it mean for you? Welcome to another edition of the Wise Investor Show. I'm Ann Summerson, one of the certified financial planners here at the Wise Investor Group in Reston, Virginia. Simon Hamilton and Chase Hinderstein are taking a bit of a break this week. Today, I'm going to focus on some big picture financial planning ideas, and it's going to be a two-parter today. I'm going to provide an overview of some of the big, beautiful bill, and as I mentioned, we're halfway through the year, so it's a good time to assess where you stand with your yearly financial goals. I'll give you some tips and checkpoints to consider. Then, in the second half of today's show, I'm going to offer a deep dive into the world of senior living options. As the senior member of our group, and by that I mean I'm the oldest member, I've become the de facto expert in the area of senior living. What does that phrase senior living mean? What does it encompass? How have senior living retirement residents evolved over the years? How do they work? And what do they cost? So we're going to have a lot of good information there today. But before I get started, I want to say that any suggestions or strategies that I may mention here are not applicable to everyone. You should consult with your own financial advisor, your own tax advisor, your estate planning attorney to see if these ideas are right for you. All right, let's get started with some of the key changes provided by the new tax bill, the big, beautiful bill. Now, it's a very large bill covering a lot of area, including healthcare and taxes for businesses and many other things. I'm only going to focus on some of the changes that affect individual taxpayers. So if you recall, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act passed in 2017, and it was due to expire at the end of this year, 2025. That act, among other things, lowered the tax brackets, effectively doubled the standard deduction, and limited the deductibility of SALT taxes, that's state and local taxes. The estate tax exclusion, which is currently just under $14 million per person, was due to revert back to pre-2018 levels at the end of 2025. This would have been about $7 million per person or $14 million for married couples. The passage of the new bill extends most of those provisions, some with changes, and there are some new provisions that weren't included in that original 2017 bill. The lower tax brackets will stay in place. The greatly increased standard deduction also stands. In 2025, the deduction will be $15,750 for single individuals and $31,500 for individuals filing jointly. There will be a new bonus deduction for older adults. This is new. For American seniors 65 and older, there will be a tax deduction up to $6,000 per taxpayer. This deduction is subject to an adjusted gross income limit of $75,000 for single filers and $150,000 for married people. Above those income limits, the deduction will gradually phase out and be completely eliminated once singles reach AGI of $150,000 and joint filers reach $250,000. It's important to note that this new senior deduction is temporary. It'll be in place from 2025 through 2028 only. Now let's talk about the SALT tax deduction. Again, that's state and local taxes like state income taxes, personal property taxes, real estate taxes, etc. The 2017 bill limited the SALT tax deduction to $10,000 for both single and married filers. Taxpayers in states with high income tax were kind of unhappy about that. The new bill temporarily raises the limit from $10,000 to $40,000, and the $40,000 will increase by 1% through 2029. In 2030, the limit reverts back to $10,000. But there are AGI phase-outs for this new $40,000 limit. If your AGI is $500,000 or below, you'll be able to deduct the full $40,000. As your income exceeds $500,000, the $40,000 will be reduced by 30% of the amount over $500,000. So once you've reached $600,000, you'll be back to $10,000. And as far as I can tell, this $500,000 AGI limit applies to both single and married filers. The new bill provides a continuation of the larger estate tax exclusion. It has, in fact, made it permanent. For 2026, the exemption will increase from just under $14 million to $15 million per person, or $30 million for married people. I suspect people with larger estates who have been on tenterhooks as the exclusion was set to revert back to lower levels can now breathe a sigh of relief. All right, now here are some brand new provisions that are provided for by the new bill. There's a new charitable deduction available to taxpayers who don't itemize. And with the large standard deduction we have now, most people don't itemize anymore. Single filers will be able to deduct $1,000, married people $2,000. If you recall, there was a similar deduction made available during COVID. It was only $300, but it expired after 2021. This provision will be made permanent, but it's not available this year. It's going to start in 2026. Another new provision of the big beautiful bill is a temporary tax deduction for car loan interest. Taxpayers can take a deduction up to $10,000 per year in car loan interest. The loan has to be on a new car made or assembled in the U.S. There's an adjusted gross income phase out on this as well. The deduction is completely phased out at $120,000 AGI for single filers and $250 for married. This is an above-the-line deduction similar to the new charitable deduction for non-itemizers that I just mentioned. But unlike the new charitable deduction, which starts next year and is permanent, the car loan interest deduction will expire at the end of 2028. Another new provision allows for some tips and overtime pay to not be subject to taxation. Generally, workers will be able to deduct up to $25,000 in reported tips and $12,500 in overtime pay from their taxable income on their federal returns. State income taxes are not affected by this and will still apply. AGI limits apply here too. Phase-outs begin at $150,000 AGI for single filers, $300,000 for married filers. This deduction is also temporary and will expire at the end of 2028 unless it's extended. All right, the last item from the new bill that I'm going to talk about today are some changes to 529 college savings accounts. Until a few years ago, the use of 529 funds was limited strictly to higher education, college, trade school. In 2017, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act allowed for $10,000 per year to be used for private secondary school tuition. The big beautiful bill will now allow for up to $20,000 per year to be withdrawn for private school tuition. But in addition, 529 funds will now be available for a wider range of kindergarten through 12th grade expenses beyond tuition. This will include tutoring, textbooks, test prep materials, online learning resources, and homeschool materials. You'll also be able to use the expenses related to special education needs like speech therapy, occupational therapy, and adaptive learning software. Also, you'll be able to use 529 funds for post-secondary credentialing expenses. Now, I looked up to see what this means, and it's a pretty big expansion. You'll be able to use 529 funds for apprenticeships, certificates awarded by educational institutions or industry organizations. You can use it for professional licenses. For example, you'd be able to use the funds for, of all things, getting your certified financial planner designation. I've just talked a lot about the fact that many of these tax provisions are subject to AGI or adjusted gross income limits. And I want to emphasize that AGI is different than taxable income. They are not interchangeable. Your AGI is your total gross income from all sources, minus certain adjustments. Those sources of income include wages, tips, interest, dividends. The adjustments are things like retirement plan salary deferrals, health savings account contributions, student loan interest, and a few other things. Your taxable income is determined by subtracting further deductions from the AGIs. And these deductions are either the standard deduction, which most people take these days, or itemized deductions, whichever is more. So your taxable income is going to be lower than your AGI. But it's the AGI, the higher number, that is used for all of these phase-outs that I've been talking about. Okay, well, that was a summary of some of the big, beautiful Bill X changes. It was not meant to be all-inclusive. Please do consult with your financial professionals to see how these rule changes might apply to you. Now, I'm going to finish up this first half of the show with some mid-year financial planning tips. These first tips are geared towards people that are still working. Have you checked to see how much you've contributed to your work retirement plan? That's your 401k, 403b, thrift savings plan if you work for the federal government. This year's maximum salary deferral is $23,500. If you're 50 or older, there's a catch-up provision of $7,500, so you can defer a total of $31,000. And new for this year, there's a super catch-up for people who are 60 through 63 years old. That additional amount is $3,750. So you can defer up to a total of $34,750. And please know that these catch-ups apply the year that you're turning 50 or 60, even if your birthday is on December 31st. And if you're not quite able to contribute the maximum to your retirement plan, you might see if you can increase it a percentage or two. Most companies make this pretty easy to do on their plan's website. If you're able to increase your contributions gradually by small amounts, you might find the slight change to your paycheck to be imperceptible, but it can make a big difference in the long run. Are you maintaining an emergency fund? You want to have enough set aside to pay for several months of non-discretionary spending like utility bills, your mortgage, or if you happen to be out of work for a while. And check to see if your savings account is keeping up with the current higher interest rates that are available now. If you're managing your own investments, mid-year is a good time to check in on your asset allocation. As markets go up and down, your target allocation of stocks and bonds can shift. Rebalancing the portfolio by buying and selling to restore the original allocation will help maintain your investment goals and your desired level of risk. All right, for some of our older listeners, now that we're entering into the second half of the year, remember that you can make qualified charitable distributions from your IRA if you're 70 and a half or older. A QCD, as we call it, is made when the check is made directly out to the charity. It's considered a direct transfer to that charity. The QCD is not deductible, but it's not taxable to you either. You can start making QCDs at 70 and a half, which was the old required minimum distribution age. Once you reach RMD age, which is now either 73 or 75, depending on how old you are now, a QCD can fulfill some or all of your required minimum distribution. If you don't itemize anymore, QCDs can be a very tax-efficient way to benefit your favorite charities. You can distribute up to $108,000 in 2025. If you plan to make qualified charitable distributions, you'll want to ensure to get them done well before the end of the year. The IRS has clarified that the check to the charity must be cashed in the same calendar year to be counted as a QCD for that year. So don't wait until the 11th hour to get your QCDs done. And you might want to check with the charities to confirm that the checks have been received and cashed. Lastly, are you thinking about doing Roth conversions later this year? That's distributing money from a traditional IRA, paying taxes now, and converting them to a Roth IRA, which will grow tax-free and not be subject to required minimum distributions. The increase in the SALT tax deduction could very well make a difference to how much you can convert. Now's a good time to start assessing what your income is going to be and communicating with your tax advisor about what will make sense for you. All right, I'm going to take a short break, and I'll be right back.
The new administration is certainly upturning the status quo, but you don't have to be a disruptor in your own portfolio. It could be wise to keep calm and carry on. Tune in every week as we discuss the latest financial trends and how to filter out the noise distracting you from sound portfolio management. Listen to us at The Wise Investor Show at raymondjames.com/The Wise Investor Group, or just find us on your favorite podcast app. Raymond James Financial Services Incorporated, member FINRA SIPC.
The information contained in this podcast represents the opinions of the hosts and guests and does not necessarily represent the views of Raymond James and Associates, Inc., the Wise Investor Group, or their respective affiliates and employees. This podcast is for investor educational purposes only and is not intended to provide and should not be relied on for investment advice. The contents of this podcast do not purport to constitute a comprehensive summary of all information necessary to base an investment decision. Past performance is not a guarantee of future results. Securities mentioned in this podcast may not be suitable for all investors. Seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your individual situation. Discuss any tax or legal matters with the appropriate professional advisors. Raymond James and Associates, Inc., member New York Stock Exchange, SIPC.
Welcome back to the Wise Investor Show. In this second half of today's podcast, I'm going to shift gears and focus on the different options for senior living that have evolved over the years. It's my role as a financial planner with our group to focus on the big picture for our clients. In the earlier years, we're always looking at things like savings rates and insurance coverages, etc. But as our clients age, many of them have considered moving to a senior living community for that last period of their lives. I've been through this very transition with my own parents about 10 years ago. Their move gave me insight and perspective into the types of communities out there and what it takes, both financially and emotionally, to make the jump. You may have heard of the acronym CCRC. It stands for Continuing Care Retirement Community. CCRCs have been around for quite a while, but they really started to get a foothold about 40 years ago. They are what they sound like. They are senior communities that provide progressive levels of residential living, from independent living to assisted living, memory care, and skilled nursing care. All levels of living are generally provided on one campus. And there are many different types of CCRCs throughout the country. Many provide apartment-style homes, while in others, the independent living option might be in a small home or cottage. They range in size from small 100 to 200 person communities to mini towns of over 2,000 people. CCRCs are not the nursing homes of yore where people went to die. Today's senior living facilities have shifted their focus to an active, wellness-driven lifestyle. There's a focus on preventative health care. Today's CCRCs have restaurants. They've got medical facilities. They provide activities, clubs, off-site excursions. They can be a very fulfilling place to live. You only have to be 62 to move to a CCRC, but the average age of new residents is closer to 80. The folks who do the best in a senior living environment are the ones who move in on the earlier side. My own parents were in their mid and upper 80s when they moved to a CCRC here in Virginia. Frankly, it was a little too late, as they never fully acclimated to their new surroundings. Move in early and create your own community. I found an interesting study done by the National Opinion Research Center at the University of Chicago. The study focused on older adults who had moved into senior housing properties and compared them to those who did not. In a nutshell, they found that senior living residents experienced happier lives and greater longevity than those who still lived at home. I found this quote on their website, so I can take no credit for it, but I like it. They say, "Age is not a disease, it's a state to which we aspire. Longevity is not just about adding years to your life, but enriching those years with health, happiness, and fulfillment." Isn't that what aging should be all about? So what's involved in moving to a CCRC? How much do they cost? Well, there are many different models, and many require, most really, an upfront buy-in and then have a monthly fee thereafter. The buy-ins can range from a few $100,000 to more than $1 million, depending on what part of the country you're in or the fanciness of the facility. The monthly fee, which can also run a few $1,000s a month, covers meals, utilities, maintenance, and amenities like pools and fitness centers. There are several types of CCR contracts out there. They're generally referred to as types A, B, and C. Type A contracts, known as life care contracts, include the full continuum of care from independent living to assisted living, memory care, and skilled nursing care, but with a predictable fee structure. If or when you need to move to a higher level of care, generally the increase in the monthly fee is nominal. Life care CCRCs are, as you can imagine, generally the most expensive. The upfront buy-in is generally higher. The monthly fees can be higher too. You're essentially prepaying for health care that you may need later. The trade-off is a guarantee that if you need additional levels of care later on, the price for it is not going to jump exponentially. A significant amount of the upfront fee and the monthly fees are considered prepayment for future medical care, and because of this, these fees qualify as a medical expense deduction. Most life care CCRCs provide their residents with an annual statement detailing the portion of their fees that qualify as a medical expense for tax purposes. Type B contracts are modified life care agreements. They have lower upfront costs and monthly fees, but they generally only provide a set number of days of included health care. Any additional care will be billed at market rates. Now, Type C contracts are fee-for-service agreements. This is what my parents had at their CCRC. You pay a lower monthly fee while in your independent living residence. If or when you need additional care and move to assisted living or memory care, you'll pay the market rates, which can be several $1,000s more per month. Where does long-term care insurance fit into all of this, you may wonder? Well, long-term care insurance works as a reimbursement for covered expenses. Remember that long-term care policies generally kick in when the insured needs assistance in 2 of 6 activities of daily living. These might include dressing, eating, bathing, etc. If you have long-term care insurance and are faced with moving to assisted living, your insurance company is likely to reimburse you for the portion of your monthly fee up to your insured amount. Remember that neither Medicare or Medicare supplemental policies pay for long-term custodial care. The life care contract is going to provide you additional care without a huge increase in fee. So you might wonder, what good is your long-term care policy? Well, many CCRCs have different levels of buy-ins and monthly fees to account for the fact that some residents arrive with long-term care policies already in place. I mentioned that many CCRCs require a buy-in. That money can be refundable to your heirs after you pass, either in part or in full. That refund might be 80 to 100% of the amount paid, but there's generally no growth or earnings on that deposit paid. Your heirs will get the amount paid or agreed upon percentage minus any refurbishment fees that are assessed. Refunds on the buy-ins are common in Type B and C contracts. Type A contracts usually have a very short window in which the deposit's refundable, maybe a year or two. After that, the buy-in is no longer refundable, as it's intended to pay for later care that the resident might need. What if you don't have long-term care insurance and you can't or don't want to move to a life care community? Well, many CCRCs will guarantee that you can live there for the rest of your life as long as you meet their financial requirements upon move-in. Essentially, if they think you have enough money to sustain the monthly fees and possible additional care for a number of years, you can move in and they will not kick you out if you happen to live a long time and run out of money. If you do start to run low, they'll chip away at your entry fee, possibly eliminating it for inheritance to your heirs later. And many CCRCs have a fund to help pay the costs for residents who are out of money. It was called the Benevolent Fund, where my parents lived. Well, I hope I've given you some things to think about if you're considering a move to a senior retirement community. Many communities have wait lists you can join with a small, usually refundable deposit. And don't let the daunting task of downsizing keep you from moving. There's a whole industry called senior move management that you can call on to help. Well, that's going to do it for me today. Thanks for listening, everyone. If you have any questions about any of the information I've shared, please feel free to reach out to us at raymondjames.com/The Wise Investor Group. Simon Hamilton will be back next week to talk about the markets. In the meantime, I wish you wise investing.
The information contained in this podcast represents the opinions of the hosts and guests and does not necessarily represent the views of Raymond James and Associates, Inc., the Wise Investor Group, or their respective affiliates and employees. This podcast is for investor educational purposes only and is not intended to provide and should not be relied on for investment advice. The contents of this podcast do not purport to constitute a comprehensive summary of all information necessary to base an investment decision. Past performance is not a guarantee of future results. Securities mentioned in this podcast may not be suitable for all investors. Seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your individual situation. Discuss any tax or legal matters with the appropriate professional advisors. Raymond James and Associates, Inc., member New York Stock Exchange, SIPC.